Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations. I'm Mary Beth Temple for Hooked for Life, and in this video we're going to take a closer look at the Get Fresh Throw. Now this is a wonderful first project, even if you're a very beginning knitter, because all you need to know how to do is knit. There's no purls at all, and I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks you need to successfully complete this project. Now click on the link below to download the free pattern. While you're down there, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for fresh content weekly on knitting, crocheting, and other yarny stuff. And you can also click on the various social media links, follow us there, and if you want to show us your wonderful first knitting project, use hashtag Yarnspirations so we can take a look. Let's get started with the Get Fresh Throw. Here I am with my garter stitch swatch. Now, the number of times I have had a beginner knitter say to me, well, the instructions tell me to knit and garter stitch, and I only know the knit stitch, so I guess I can't do it. So this is one of those language things. The only thing that garter stitch means is that when I'm working straight or back and forth in rows, which is what we're doing for this project, I'm going to knit every stitch of every row. That's the only thing that garter stitch means. When you're working in the round, it's different, but we're not working in the round, so we're not going to worry about it. So we're just going to knit every stitch of every row. Now you will have cast on 81 stitches. My swatch is far smaller so that it fits comfortably on camera. Let's take a little refresher course on the knit stitch. If you need to, you're going to take your right hand needle tip, insert it under the front leg of the next stitch on the left hand needle, yarn over, which is bringing your yarn around between the two needles. I like to keep a little bit of tension on the working yarn, and working yarn is another word that you may not know. It means the ball of yarn is attached to it. So the strand that is attached to the skein or the ball, that is the working yarn. So I'm going to keep a tiny bit of tension on that, and I'm going to bring it through that stitch on the left hand needle. I'm going to push it all the way up onto the fat part of the needle. I don't want to work too close to the tip because that makes your work tight. And then I'm going to pop that stitch off the left hand needle. Now this is right-handed. Of course, left-handed is the exact opposite. Once again, going under that front leg, making a yarn over by bringing the yarn between the two needles, keeping a tiny, tiny bit of tension on the right hand to make sure that that stitch comes right through. And when I pop it off the left hand needle, I'm making sure it comes all the way up to the fattest part of the hook. Pardon me, the fattest part of the needle. Can you tell I've been crocheting this morning? So I'm going to knit all the way across. So that is the end of one row. Now I'm going to go on to the next row. All I'm going to do is turn my work and knit across that row again. Now, since we're knitting straight, why is it that we wanted you to get a circular knitting needle? The reason is this blanket is 46 inches wide, give or take a little bit, and that would be a heck of a lot of stitches to put on a straight needle. Straight needles, by and large, are about 14 inches long. If you try and squish 46 inches worth of stitches onto 14 inches worth of needle, it's going to be very heavy on your dominant hand, and the stitches are going to pop off the end, and it's going to be incredibly irritating. So the reason we're telling you to get a circular needle, even though we're working straight or in rows, is because the width of the circular needle will accommodate a big number of stitches. Now, a couple things I also want to point out. If you are following along in the pattern, you're going to knit 10 rows with A, then 4 with B, 10 with C, 4 with D, etc., etc. And then you're going to repeat that color pattern. So I want to talk about how we're going to add a new color. But before we do that, now I happen to know that I have knit 10 rows because I counted. Because I just have this little swatch and not a great big blanket. Now, what happens if you're interrupted or you're done knitting for the day and you pick it up the next day and you can't remember how many rows you've done in a particular color? First thing I want to tell you to do is it's good practice for every knitting project to put your work down at the end of the row. Try and get to the end of the row. Try not to put your work down when you're in the middle. There's two reasons for that. One is it's difficult when you're coming back, if you're not a very practiced knitter, to remember which way you were going. But also it puts too much stress on any given stitch, and so it doesn't look as even. Your work doesn't look as even. So if there's any chance in heck of doing it, get to the end of the row before you put your work down. Now in garter stitch, we have what we call a ridge. You see these ridges? Let me get a little closer. So that guy is a ridge, and a ridge equals 2 rows. So I'm looking at the right side of the work, and I know I'm looking at the right side of the work because that ridge is very near the bottom. If I was looking at the wrong side of the work, we'd have this little extra bit here between the cast on edge and the first ridge. So I'm looking at the right side of the work. I know it's the right side because the ridge is sitting at the very bottom. And since I know I wanted to change colors after 10 rows, I want to make sure I have 5 ridges. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so again, I knew we had 10 rows going because I counted, but it was easier for me to count because I had a small swatch. So I counted my ridge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ridges is 10 rows. Now I want to add a second color. Now, generally speaking, I am not a person who likes knots. I don't think there should be knots in knitting. And when you're finished your project, you're going to go back later and weave in ends, which means you're going to thread this through a needle and weave it in and out of the back of the work. And I know we have extra videos on that to keep those tails out of the way. For me, when I am changing colors like we're doing here, all I'm going to do is knit with the new color, and I'm going to leave a 4 to 6 inch fold of the yarn so I can weave it in later. So don't start here. You want to leave a generous 4 to 6 inches at the end so that when you come back, when your blanket's all finished, and you want to weave in those ends, you have a nice long end to weave in. So all I did was I'm taking that fold and knitting that first stitch with it. Now when I come back, now see, I want to make sure that I'm not then trying to knit with the tail. The tail is the yarn that goes to the cut end. Remember, we're talking about the working yarn goes to the ball. The tail is what goes to the cut end. So I'm going to knit all the way across. And this is how it looks with my new color starting the next ridge. Now if I go ahead and go to the next row, you'll see that the ridge on this side is 2 colors. And that's okay. That's just how color changing happens. And when you move forward and you're trying to count ridges, you know that these 2 color ridges are on the wrong side, and you want to count your ridges when you're deciding where to go next. You want to count those on the right side. So when you see these 2 color ridges, you know that's the wrong side of the work. Now, when I come up to the last stitch of this row and the stitch below it, they're going to look a little loose and sloppy, and that's okay. It's because they have cut ends hanging out. When you weave those stitches in, when you weave those tails in, you can tighten up those stitches right then so that they look the same as everything else. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So right here, this is the last stitch. So there's a tail hanging here. So see how loose that is? But don't worry about it, because when you're going to weave in that end, you just give it a little tug and it looks like everybody else. So I'm going to keep knitting along in garter stitch, following the stripe pattern on the pattern. And when I have completed all that, I'm going to cast off, and I'm sure we have a video for that too. So thank you so much for joining us here for the Get Fresh Throw. I'm Mary Beth Temple for Hooked for Life. Is this your first knitting project? If so, show us by using hashtag Yarnspirations and following us on one of the social media links that you can get the links to in the description box below. We're so happy you decided to spend this time with us. Enjoy your Get Fresh Throw, and we look forward to seeing you again here real soon. Bye-bye.